We're sailing to Normandy from here in Portsmouth across the English Channel. In 1805, Horatio Nelson left here for the Battle of Waterloo. As the barge pulled away from the shore, the people gave 3 cheers, which his lordship returned by waving his hat. Nearby, he is commemorated by a statue. Here served Horatio Nelson. You who tread his footsteps, remember his glory. But before our journey tomorrow, we're taking the hovercraft over to the Isle of Wight. It's the fastest way to cross the Solent, just under 10 minutes. The service was launched in 1965. There's a short turnaround time and we're on our way. The advantage of a hovercraft is that it can travel at extremely low tides, floating on a cushion of air that has been forced under the craft by a fan. So just for the experience, we're sailing from Southsea in Portsmouth to Ryde and back. In fact, you could say we've got a ticket to ride.
She's got a ticket to ride. She's got a ticket to ride. She's got a ticket to ride, but she don't care. Well, baby don't care. Well, baby don't care. Well, baby don't care. Well, baby don't care.
Next morning, we'll be leaving Portsmouth to sail across the English Channel to Ouistreham near Caen in Normandy. We were up early for the short drive to check in with Brittany Ferries. Before long, we were driving up the ramp to board the ship. But the car in front thinks he knows better. Doesn't he know that loading is an exact process? And the marshal's not very happy. No, watch me, get back in line. Right on 8 a.m. we were sailing out of Portsmouth. Our route is across the widest part of the channel, so it will take some 6 hours. Plenty of time for breakfast and a look round. There's a special area for dogs who have to be muzzled whilst on board. Our seats were reserved at the bow of the ship, so we settled in for a long sleep and a good read. Though the lounge was very comfortable, it was lovely to get out in the fresh air for a while. We were soon called down to the car deck. The time had passed amazingly quickly, and so we just had to have the passports checked before we were on our way. Leaving Ouistreham, we drove east down the motorway through Normandy, the main purpose of our trip being to visit MONET'S Garden, so the base for the first 4 nights would be nearby in Vernon. After a 2-hour drive, we checked into our apartment. It's very nice, and the balcony overlooks the River Seine. It's been a long day, so I think we've earned a nice cold glass of French wine. The following morning, the weather forecast was not good, as we drove to Les Andelys, and later to Lyon-la-Forêt. As we approached Les Andelys, we could see the ruins of Chateau Galliard. The castle was built in 1196 by Richard the Lionheart, Duke of Normandy and King of England. His aim was to keep watch over this valley and protect the nearby city of Rouen from attacks by the King of France, Philip Augustus. However, only 7 years later, Philip would capture the castle, thus signalling Normandy's attachment to France. In Lyon-la-Forêt, we came across this memorial to Charles de Gaulle, saying that on June the 18th, 1940, from London, he reinforces the call to continue to fight. In the days to come, we would see many war memorials in this part of the world. The village is full of half-timbered and brick houses from the 17th century. Lyon-la-Forêt is a small Norman village of around 700 inhabitants and has been recognised as one of the most beautiful villages in France. The market hall has oak pillars and chestnut wood frames, which were taken directly from the neighbouring forest in the 17th century. You've probably noticed there are not many people about because of the rain, and that's because they're all in here, having lunch in this lovely bistro. When it eased off, we walked back to the car. But it wasn't long before it was heavier than ever. I think it must be something to do with the fact that Normandy is not very far from England. So we drove back to our apartment. By early evening, the sun was out, so the view from our balcony was amazing. The small half-timbered building on the right is an old flour mill dating back to the 16th century. It used to stand on a bridge, which has crumbled and been damaged over the centuries. At the end of World War II, it was rebuilt and is now the symbol of Vernon. The nearby Château des Tourelles dates back to 1196, the same time as Château Galliard in Les Andelys. It was built as a fortress to protect the medieval bridge. This is one of 4 French longships built by Vikings specifically to navigate the River Seine, to take guests to the heart of Paris some 75 kilometers upstream. And Vernon is one of the places they stop on the way. And it's not only tourists who use the river. We were surprised at just how many barges of cargo there were. The weather next day was good, so we took the 15-minute drive to Giverny to visit Monet's Garden, and later on to La Roche-Guyon. Even when it opened at 9:30, there was a queue at the small ticket office. Monet moved here in 1883 with his family and transformed the house and gardens into a true work of art. It was a place where he was to spend the last 40 years of his life. The house is really colourful, with green shutters against a pale pink plaster background. And talking of colour, look at the blue kitchen with Rouen tiles, and the yellow dining room as if bathed in golden sunshine. This is one of the most famous gardens in the world, and Claude Monet painted it more than 300 times. It's split into two parts. This area in front of the house is the Clos Normand, with the traditional air of conventional flower beds, offering no hint of the stunning Japanese water garden that everyone comes to see. There's even a replica of Monet's garden in Kitagawa, Japan, more than 6,000 miles away. But it's the water lilies for which this garden is most famous and made Claude Monet one of the greatest artists of Impressionism. Before Claude Monet, Giverny was just a small rural village. Now it receives 500,000 visitors a year. At the far end of the village is the church of St. Radegonde. And next to the church is the grave of Monet and his family. A simple inscription marks his birth date and death, regretted by all. After a lovely morning, we followed the Seine to La Roche-Guyon. And what a pleasure to have a bite to eat outside in the sunshine. The Chateau de la Roche-Guyon was built in the 12th century to control a river crossing of the Seine. During World War II, it became the headquarters for Rommel, from where he defended Normandy against the Allies. Back at our apartment, when night fell, the view over the Seine was magical. Next morning we explored Vernon, and later would take the train to Rouen. This is Rue Bourbon-Penthière in the 19th century, and here is the street today. Now most of Monet's original paintings are in Paris, but there are two here in the small museum in Vernon. The one is entitled Pourville Beach and Cliff Sunset, but perhaps more famous is the Water Lilies Pond, painted in 1908. And there's a rather beautiful sort of modern-day Impressionism. But back outside, many medieval half-timbered buildings were spared the bombings during World War II. This sign reads, "Honey from Beekeepers." The Archives Tower lies in the centre of Vernon. It's the keep of the former Vernon Castle. In the 18th century it was used to store municipal archives. Then we took the train to Rouen, where some parts of the city are delightful. Just look at this street with its hanging umbrellas. Very French. In the busiest shopping street in Rouen stands the Gros Horloge astronomical clock, dating back to the 14th century. There are lovely tea shops here too. Just look at this one with its chandeliers. But the city is particularly infamous for one person. Joan of Arc was put on trial for blaspheming by wearing men's clothes and acting upon visions that were demonic. The cross behind me marks the spot where she was burned at the stake in 1431, aged just 19. And this is the modern church of St. Joan of Arc, with its sweeping curves evoking the flames which consumed her. Some 25 years after her death, a court reinvestigated her trial and overturned the verdict. Consequently, she was revered as a martyr, Saint Joan of Arc. With a ceiling depicting an upturned longboat, this church was built in 1979. The cathedral, however, dates from the 16th century, and Claude Monet painted it many times from this very spot. Rouen Cathedral is one of the most famous Gothic cathedrals in the world. Then we took a trip on the land train, and we noticed that despite the city being severely damaged in 1944 by the D-Day bombings, it is noted for its stunning half-timbered buildings. Today we're going back down the A13 to the seaside town of HONFLEUR before moving our base for the next 3 nights from Vernon to Cannes. HONFLEUR sits on an estuary where the Seine meets the English Channel. We joined a guided tour and Pierre turned out to be quite a character.
Distilled cider becomes Calvados. The name of the area where we are now in Normandy, the area is called the Pays d'Auge.
But we started by St. Leonard Church, where there was a funeral going on. In medieval times, the washing was done here. As in Rouen, there are many half-timbered buildings, and this one has chestnut cladding, which doesn't rot. This street is like something out of a Dickens novel, although it dates from the 16th century. In fact, HONFLEUR was lucky and escaped the bombing of World War II. The Street of the Small Butchers. Pierre told us about the butcher's stalls which used to line this street. But this house is very interesting, as the wooden beams were brought as a sort of kit. You can clearly see the numbered markings in the wood, and also the tongue and groove assembly. This is all hundreds of years before IKEA. But it's the old 17th century harbour for which HONFLEUR is most famous, ringed by 16th and 18th century townhouses. St. Catherine's Church is made completely of wood. The bell tower is built away from the church to reduce the risk of fire from lightning strikes. The 15th century building was built by shipbuilders, hence the upturned longboat roof. HONFLEUR's a lovely place. It's no wonder it's so popular. From our new base in Cannes, the next day we drove towards the coast before stopping at the British Normandy Memorial at Vers-sur-Mer, then back to Cannes to visit the Memorial Museum. You can't go very far in Normandy before you come across something commemorating World War II.
We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender.
Winston Churchill's inspirational words seemed very appropriate as we arrived at the British Normandy Memorial. It was opened in 2021, overlooking Gold Beach, where most of the British forces came ashore. 2024 marks the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and here at the British War Memorial there is a depiction of the 1,475 men who died on the first day fighting for our freedom. I've just seen a Frenchman reading the dedications. May we never forget, freedom is not free. And he went, this is called the People's Tribute, standing with giants, and you can't help but be moved by it. All gave some, but some gave all. With the rain set to last all afternoon, we went to the Caen Normandy Memorial Museum, where there was a special exhibition on America before the Second World War. Another section deals with the rise of the Nazis and the Second World War.
Dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe, dass ich anständig meine Zeit verwendet habe im Dienste meines Volkes. Gib du jetzt deine Stimme ab. Wenn ja, dann tritt für mich ein, so wie ich für dich eingesetzt bin.
This country is at war with Germany.
Let us go forward together with our united strength. The German war is therefore at an end.
The museum also looks at the Cold War and the difference between communist life in the USSR and the more democratic and arguably affluent USA. The Russians were the first to put a man in space, and so began the space race with the USA. Fortunately, by the time we came out, it had stopped raining. It was early evening as we drove from Caen to visit Hill 112's memorial. For during the war, this was where Angie's father fought with the 43rd Wessex Infantry Division. He sustained shrapnel wounds to his back and was sent to Blackpool to recuperate. Well, it's certainly been a day for reflection. Arromanches was our first port of call next day, our last in Normandy. Then on to Bayeux, before returning to our hotel. This is a lovely beach on a Sunday morning, but the scars from the past remain, from 80 years ago. This is Arromanches and Gold Beach, where in 1944 British troops came ashore, known as the Normandy Landings, and the remains of the Mulberry harbours are still here. Nearby, we went in the Landings Museum, which shows the preparations and the results. It's the 6th of June 1944, and the museum focuses on D-Day, when floating harbours, codenamed mulberries, were constructed off the coast of Normandy. It's an artificial port, and today you can still see a section of one. In the museum, this model shows the scale of the port, with its 6 miles of flexible steel roadways floating on steel or concrete pontoons. The sections were towed out from the UK by barges, and ships were sunk to protect the outer harbour from the weather. The whole construction was quite remarkable, and no doubt played a large part in winning the war. Arromanches is a lovely seaside town. It's a place for tourists who want to learn about the town's notorious past. And so we drove to the lovely town of Bayeux. The Notre Dame Cathedral was consecrated in 1077 in the presence of William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy and King of England. This is the Bayeux Tapestry Museum, where you were given a handset which explains the story very clearly. You walk slowly along, round the end and up the other side. The tapestry depicts the victory won by William, Duke of Normandy, over the English at the Battle of Hastings in 1066 and is an amazing 70 metres long. A fabric strip on which the tapestry is hung bears 58 numbers, allowing scenes from the story to be identified. It's thought to have been made in Canterbury, to decorate the nave of the cathedral in Bayeux, which we've just seen. The Normans here are on horseback and the Saxons on foot. Different colours are used to give a sense of depth and movement, something which is very evident in this 3D model of the same scene. In fact, the French company Pixie has so far made 3D models of the first 10 metres of the cloth. From his deathbed, Edward named Harold as his successor, and Harold is crowned King of England. Everyone knows what happened to him at the Battle of Hastings. The tapestry was intended for a largely illiterate audience, hence the pictures, with only some writing in Latin. It really is an amazing piece of history, and we felt privileged to see it. Next morning, as we drove back onto the car ferry bound for Portsmouth, and later arrived in the dock area, we reflected on a week which started out simply as a trip to see Monet's Garden plus the Bayeux Tapestry, but had developed into something much more meaningful. The Normandy coast was a moving reminder of the past, lest we forget.